What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is the JEB In FLOW podcast on the Street Parking Podcast channel. Good to have you here with us whenever you happen to be watching or listening to this. Good to see you. Good to have you here. Don't forget to hit the hotline, 360-524-3313. Got some good stuff on there. In fact, one of the suggestions is something that kind of helped me figure out what I was going to do for this particular episode. And I think as more of this stuff comes in, it'll be cool because a lot of the questions are similar. We'll do like a kind of a Q&A episode here in a little bit where I'll just answer a bunch of things or questions or comments and address a lot of stuff in one episode, and that'll be cool. It'll be very relevant to training and stress, sleep, all that good stuff. So looking forward to that. So the suggestion that I thought was really good, that it came in last week, was if I could do some kind of monthly, like, suggested reading, book suggestions. And I think that's an awesome idea. So I'm going to give you a suggestion today. Now, as I was thinking about this and thinking about what I was going to talk about relative to this book, I realized that a lot of times I'll kind of pull from a lot of different sources. So I don't want to give everybody like 5 books to refer to, but it may be hard to just talk about one particular thing, one particular book, or one particular source of information, because it's generally kind of all mixed together. That being said, crazy as it sounds, the book that I think really kind of opened me up and gave me so much more insight into the mindset that comes with training, and the mindset that can really help in life and in things beyond training, is a book called Flow. It's called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And it's written by a psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I am not going to try to spell that for you, but if you just Google Flow and then Mihaly, which is Mihaly, we'll put the name in the show notes as well so you can see. But that is his book that I believe came out right around 1990. So if you go check out this book, know that it's crazy, but yeah, it's 30 years ago, which in the field of psychology and especially things like mindset and personal development and performance, a lot has happened since then. His principles still are being used today. His experience sampling method is still being used today. What he says still holds up. The examples that he kind of uses for some things are a little dated. So it's like, oh, well, now that there's internet, I wonder how things have changed. But it's a really phenomenal book. He goes into all kinds of different large-scale cultural and social observations as far as how we identify with what is happiness and fulfillment, and then takes it down to the individual as well. So he does make some observations about large groups, cultures, historical periods, that kind of thing. Don't read this book if you're easily triggered. It's a really good book, but yeah, if you're like part of any kind of, if you're real deep into any kind of ideology, he might have an observation about that ideology. So be open. That's all I'll say. Anyways, the name of this podcast, JEB in Flow, right? So fitting that the book that I'm going to start with is called Flow. And what is flow? So I'm pretty sure that most of us, most of you have experienced flow at some point in the past. And basically what it is it's the state of your mind and your body during an optimal experience. So the book's The Psychology of Optimal Experiences. So then we got to get into kind of like what is an optimal experience, and that could be a lot of different things. I think the things that really jump out in terms of an optimal experience is like extreme sports, really high art, things where you are so involved in what is happening that everything else seems to get further away. The way that I like to think about flow is a sense of mastery in the midst of chaos. So being in a situation where there's a lot of unknowns, there's a lot of variables that are out of your control, yet you feel a sense of mastery over the situation. So if you've ever competed or performed on a stage or been just really involved in some type of an activity where time seems to slow down, or maybe even it kind of undulates where it speeds up, but it also slows down. So it's just not moving in a steady or kind of linear path or pattern. That's a really big indicator of a flow state. When your senses are very heightened, like your focus, maybe your visual focus or your audio focus is narrowed and to pinpointed to some kind of precise thing, location, object, event. And at the same time, maybe your senses are broadened. So I like to think about like a baseball pitcher. A baseball pitcher who is pitching a no-hitter can be probably almost, it's a requirement to be in a flow state to be able to do that. So they are super focused on the batter in front of them, maybe on the signs that they're getting from the catcher. They're super focused on what's going on in their body, probably awareness of their heart rate, their level of arousal, trying to stay sort of relaxed enough to where they can focus on delivering a really good pitch. But at the same time, they have to be aware of, I guess if it's a no-hitter, let's take that out, because I was going to say they have to be aware of who's on base. But if it's a no-hitter, I guess there'd be nobody on base. I'm not a baseball guy, but let's say a pitcher is pitching a really good game. So there's people on base. There's other things that are happening. So you have to be aware of what's going on, but at the same time, hyper-focused on your particular task that you have to execute. So what Csikszentmihalyi, his simplest explanation of flow is total involvement with life. So if you are totally involved, 100% completely involved in life, in your existence, in that particular moment, wherever you happen to be, that is a state of flow. And when you're in that state, basically, it's a state that becomes meaningful and memorable, and it creates growth, and it leads to happiness. And it doesn't always lead to happiness right there in that moment. Sometimes you have to wait and look back on it and then realize what a happy moment it was. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, if flow is a way that we can create meaningful, memorable, powerful experiences that lead to happiness, that's a pretty good reason to seek out ways in which we can find states of flow. And we don't always have to go and do really high consequence activities. And we don't have to really become a master of any skill other than maybe practicing mastery of our own consciousness. So, couple of things, excuse me, before we get into how to find flow, how to get into it, there's a couple of things we need to understand. And the first one is our consciousness. What I really like about the way that this guy presents consciousness or talks about it is that, in the field of psychology, there's not a very agreed upon, widely accepted definition of consciousness. And I think some of the more mystical folks like to use consciousness in some sort of ethereal way, like it's something that is existing outside of the material or the physical or the biological world. And I don't know, to be honest, how I feel about it or how I would necessarily define it, because there's a lot of ways that we can define it, and there's a lot of context that we can use consciousness. But what Csikszentmihalyi says is that consciousness really is just intentionally ordered information. So we take in information whether we want to or not, and then our consciousness orders it, puts it into some sort of sequence, arranges it in some way so that we can use it or respond to it. So it really is rooted in a biological process. So without consciousness, you would still perceive things that are going on. Without consciousness, you would be able to see things around you. You'd be able to hear things. You would be able to feel things. But your reaction would be purely instinctual. Everything would pretty much be like a knee-jerk reaction. So if it's very quiet and still and maybe dark, and all of a sudden there's a loud bang, you don't have time to order that information in a way that would give you, would allow you to choose your response. It's so jarring that you jump and you tense up, and maybe even you gasp for breath or something like that. All of that stuff, that's just instinct. You didn't choose to do that. You didn't order information in a certain way so that you did that. That's just like the reaction. So that's the lack of consciousness. So thinking about that instinct, that knee-jerk reaction, That is deep down in our genetics. That is deep down in our nervous system. That when we perceive a threat, we react a certain way. When we don't perceive a threat, then we react a different way. So with consciousness, what we're able to do is override that. Yes, we have these genetic instructions that are deep down in our DNA. But if we practice mastery of our consciousness and we can train it and we can condition it, then what we can do is actually override those instructions and direct our actions and our thoughts and our consciousness and everything else in whatever direction we want. To get into a flow state, first we have to understand that. So another cool thing about consciousness is it's basically intentionally ordered information, right? We're processing information constantly. So from what I understand, you can take in 7 unique bits of information at the same time. Only 7. And for you to then take in another piece of information after that, or the next 7 bits of information, it takes about 1/18 of a second. So we can take in, process 126 bits of information per second. If you think about per minute, per hour, per day, it's a lot. There's a lot of information that's going in and out. So how we order that information can be very, very impactful on the quality of our life. Some of how we order that information is a little bit outside of our control, but a lot of how we order that information is within our control. And it's that which is within our control that we want to focus on and play with. The other 2 important things to think about or to understand when it comes to seeking out a state of flow are chaos and order. So if you've seen the yin-yang symbol, which is like the circle, little lazy S running through that divides it into 2 equal portions. One is dark and one is light. And then inside each of those sections, there's another little circle of the opposite color. So what that represents is this balance between chaos and order. So there's a law of thermodynamics that basically the universe is in this state of entropy where everything eventually will dissolve into chaos. Out of chaos comes order. With our consciousness, we are trying to intentionally order information. So we have this chaotic mix of data that's coming in, constantly bombarding us. And it's just in our nature to try to put it into some kind of working order. It feels good to order things. If you look at every major religion, every ideology, every philosophy, mathematics, all of that is really an attempt or a way to put things into order, to bring some kind of order and peace, honestly, harmony to what we don't understand or what is chaos, what is disordered. And eventually, history has proven, the systems of order that have been created by humans have largely gone away. Every great empire eventually crumbles. There's no empire that has lasted forever. It would be, I don't know, erroneous to assume that any empire that's around right now would last forever. So order eventually will dissolve into chaos, and then out of that chaos, we reorder it and we bring new meaning and new order. And I think that each time that kind of cycle happens, we learn from it. And perhaps we can then make the next system of order more effective, certainly more complex. And then it breaks down. And then we learn from that. And eventually the next level becomes more complex, higher system of order. And it just keeps going and going. And it's the same thing for challenging yourself. If you keep doing the same challenge over and over again, it's no longer a challenge. It becomes super boring. You have to keep upping the level of complexity or intensity as you go. Otherwise, you just stop doing it. That's also another topic for another day. But when it comes to flow, I was thinking about this. One way I really like to think about flow is real-time ordering of chaos in potentially high consequence environments. So it's like putting yourself in the midst of a chaotic situation and ordering that in real time and being present in that process of applying order to the chaos is an optimal experience, creates that flow state. So before we can really actively, routinely, consistently find optimal experiences and put ourselves into states of flow so that we can become better people, honestly, we have to really kind of understand the idea of consciousness, excuse me, and the idea of chaos and order. So for this week, that's going to be what I want you to do. You can do this every day. I highly recommend you do this every day, but do it at least once. Take 10 minutes. Take 10 minutes and you're going to divide that 10 minutes into 2 5-minute sections. So for the first 5 minutes, your job is to try to notice all of the information that you're processing. So those 7 unique bits of information that you're able to process every 18th of a second, try to notice all of those. It's hard to do. It's impossible to do. You're going to drive yourself crazy. Don't worry. It's only 5 minutes. And then for the next 5 minutes, you're going to focus on one thing. That thing should probably be your breath. Just focus on your breath. What you'll notice is that when you're trying to focus on everything, you stop doing the most basic things, like breathing. When I did this, I noticed that I was holding my breath. I noticed that I was clenching and I was getting really tense in my body. And as soon as I only paid attention to my breath, all of a sudden I just allowed all of these other bits of information to happen around me without trying to actually put my focus on all of them. But you've got to experience that on your own. You've got to experience them back to back for it to really make a lot of sense. I think it's a great exercise. So try that. 10 minutes, first 5 minutes. Try to focus on every bit of possible information that you are taking in, the color of the room, the smell, the way you feel, what's going on, what you see, what you hear, all of that. And then the next 5 minutes, just pay attention to your breath for 5 minutes. Let me know how it goes. Have a really great week this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I love you guys. Talk to you soon.